Epic opening prologue. The fire that commands the world. Before men built empires, they built dreams. Long before the ashes of kingdoms fell upon the earth, there was a city born from wolves and gods, a city that would name itself Rome. From that city would rise a man destined not to rule, but to redefine destiny itself. His birth was written in the stars, his blood blessed by the goddess Venus, and his heart forged in the chaos of a world collapsing upon itself. The world called him Gaius Julius Caesar, but the heavens knew him as something more. He was the child of ambition, the shadow of prophecy, the flame that would burn both the republic and its chains. Through wars and betrayals, crowns and daggers, he would carve his path from mortal to myth. He would raise Rome to its greatest glory and bury it with his own hands. And when the gods fell silent and history turned its gaze to eternity, only one truth would remain, that power is mortal, but legacy is divine. Thus begins the epic of the eternal emperor, whose name time could never silence. Julius Caesar. Welcome back to my channel. This channel specializes in writing about epic tales and myths from around the world. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to help me out. Today, we will dive into a story titled Julius Caesar, the Eternal Emperor. Here is the detailed content. Chapter 1. The Child of Venus. From the blood of gods and the fire of men, a child was born, destined to hold the fate of Rome in his hands. Night draped itself over the 7 hills of Rome, and thunder rolled like the murmur of ancient gods. In a modest villa on the Subura, a woman labored beneath the trembling glow of oil lamps. Her name was Aurelia, descendant of an old patrician line, proud and unbroken, even as the Republic tore itself apart. That night, the wind howled through marble streets like a voice from the heavens, and the augurs whispered, "Venus herself walks among mortals." When the child cried for the first time, a bolt of lightning struck the Tiber. The omen was clear. A boy of divine fire had entered the world. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. Rumor spread through Rome like wildfire. The priests of Jupiter read the sky and found a star burning brighter than any other, crimson and alive, like the gaze of a newborn god. Some claimed Venus had blessed the child as her blood heir, for his lineage traced back to Aeneas, the Trojan hero and son of the goddess. Others warned that such children brought both glory and ruin. But destiny does not ask for permission. It simply unfolds. As Caesar grew, Rome decayed. The Republic that had once been a beacon of order and law was now a viper as nest of greed, blood, and ambition. Senators bartered like merchants. Generals raised armies, not for Rome, but for themselves, and the people starved while marble temples gleamed. It was an empire of gold built on ashes. In the shadow of that corruption, young Caesar studied with an intensity that frightened his tutors. He learned words sharper than swords, rhetoric, philosophy, and the art of command. His mind absorbed the lessons of Greek masters, the courage of Aeneas, and the cunning of Ulysses. Yet beneath it all burned something older, something divine, an unshakable belief that he was meant for more. A prophecy followed him from childhood. When Rome trembles, the child of Venus shall rise, crowned in laurel and blood. On his 15th birthday, Caesar stood before the altar of Venus Genetrix, where his mother whispered a prayer. The incense rose in spirals, wrapping him in the scent of honey and smoke. A single white dove descended upon his shoulder, and in that silent moment, Aurelia's eyes filled with both pride and fear. "Remember, my son," she said softly, "those blessed by the gods walk paths of glory and tragedy." Caesar's gaze lifted to the statue of Venus, radiant, eternal, holding the apple of destiny. He bowed his head and whispered, "Then let tragedy come, if it must. I will carve my name upon the world." That night, a red comet crossed the Roman sky, tracing fire across the darkness. The priests took it as an omen of greatness. The senators took it as a warning, but to the boy beneath that burning trail, it was a promise that his fate was written not in parchment or law, but in the stars themselves. Chapter 2. Rome in chains. Before he conquered the world, he walked through the ruins of his own. Rome, the eternal city, the heart of a republic once built on virtue and discipline, now reeked of corruption. Its marble columns still glowed in the sunset, but the foundations trembled with deceit. The Senate, once the guardian of the republic, had become a den of wolves draped in purple robes. Men no longer fought for honor. They fought for gold, for votes, for the fleeting whisper of power. Amid this decaying world, young Gaius Julius Caesar walked the streets of Subura, the poorest and most violent quarter of Rome. He watched beggars kneel beside senators, litters, slaves beaten beneath golden statues, and thieves hung beside the forum as a warning. Yet, even in this chaos, Caesar's eyes gleamed with something untamed, not anger, but clarity. He saw what others refused to see, that Rome, though mighty, was chained. Chained by greed, chained by fear, chained by men who claimed to serve the gods while serving only themselves. From his earliest years, Caesar's blood burned with a sense of destiny. His tutors spoke of history, law, and virtue, of how the republic was founded by men who banished kings forever. But the boy who listened to these stories would later ask, quietly, if Rome banished kings, why does she still bow to tyrants? His mother Aurelia, wise and composed, often warned him to guard his tongue. "Power," she told him, "is not taken by words, my son, it is taken by waiting." But Caesar's fire could not be easily tamed. He listened to philosophers speak of freedom, to generals boast of conquest, and to senators weave lies thicker than spider silk. In the silence of his chamber, he wrote, "If virtue no longer rules Rome, then perhaps the gods must choose a new hand to guide her." The first time he entered the Senate house, Caesar was barely 17. His uncle, Gaius Marius, a legendary general, stood beside him, a man both feared and loved, the hammer of Rome's enemies, and the enemy of her corrupt elite. Marius was of the populares, the faction that claimed to fight for the people. Opposing him were the optimates, the old guard of aristocrats, led by Lucius Cornelius Sulla, ruthless, brilliant, and merciless. To the boy, this was not politics. It was war without swords. He saw in their eyes the hunger that would one day consume Rome whole. Marius looked at his nephew and said, "Remember this, Caesar. In Rome, the sword is not the most dangerous weapon, it is the smile." Those words would haunt him forever. When Sulla's legions marched upon Rome years later, that smile turned into blood. The republic devoured itself. Marius was declared an enemy of the state. His allies were slaughtered. Caesar, barely 20, was suddenly a marked man, nephew to a traitor, husband to Cornelia, the daughter of Marius's ally, Cinna. Sulla demanded he divorce her to prove his loyalty to the new regime. Caesar refused. He refused even when soldiers came to seize his property. He refused even when his friends fled. And when they told him that Sulla had sworn to have his head, Caesar simply said, "Tell the dictator that Caesar can die, but Caesar cannot kneel." For that defiance, he was forced into hiding, wandering through the countryside, hunted like an animal. The young patrician who could have lived in luxury now slept in caves and forests, his body weak, his spirit unbroken. It was there, amid exile and fear, that he began to understand power, not as privilege, but as endurance. One night, under the pale light of the moon, Caesar met an old augur in the hills near Tarracina, a priest who claimed to read the will of the gods in the flight of birds. The man studied Caesar's face for a long moment and then said, "You have the eyes of a storm. You will break the chains of Rome, but the chains will break you in return." Caesar bowed respectfully. "Then I will shatter them both," he replied. The augur smiled, a sorrowful smile, as if he had seen too many kings rise and fall. "Beware the laurel, child of Venus," he whispered. "It crowns heroes and graves alike." Eventually, through the pleading of friends and the intercession of the Vestal virgins, Caesar was pardoned by Sulla. "Let him live, and you will one day see the death of your aristocracy." Sulla was right, but destiny, once again, waited in silence. When Caesar returned to Rome, he was no longer the naive boy who had once dreamed of virtue. He had seen what power truly meant, the blade beneath the toga, the blood behind the marble. Yet he also understood something else, that fear ruled men more than faith ever could. He began to train not only his body, but his mind. He studied law, speech, the art of persuasion. He learned to turn words into weapons, to make men believe that obedience was glory, and that his will was their destiny. He no longer sought to survive Rome, he sought to redefine it. And still, every night, he prayed before the statue of Venus Genetrix. "Mother of my blood," he whispered, "guide me through this empire of lies. If I must burn to cleanse Rome, then let the fire begin with me." Years later, as Sulla's ashes, scattered into the Tiber and the Senate, feasted on his memory, a young Caesar stood on the steps of the Forum, looking out over the city of marble and misery. The chains still gleamed in the sunlight, invisible but unbroken. He smiled quietly and said to himself, "If Rome is in chains, then I will be her conqueror, not her servant." The wind carried his words into the distance, across the rooftops, through the alleys and temples, where even the gods might have paused to listen. And high above the city, for the briefest moment, the clouds parted, revealing a star burning crimson in the Roman sky. Chapter 3. The Serpent and the Laurel. The serpent learns not to strike too soon, for in patience it grows fangs sharp enough to pierce gods. The years of exile and survival had carved something unbreakable into the young Caesar. When he returned to Rome, he was no longer merely a patrician scion. He was a creature forged by loss, tempered by silence, and hungry for meaning. Yet destiny does not reveal itself to the impatient. It whispers first, testing the hearts of men. And so Caesar became a student, once more, of wisdom, speech, and power. The art of words he studied under Apollonius of Rhodes, one of the greatest teachers of rhetoric, a Greek whose words could sway kings and dissolve armies. The old man saw something divine in the Roman youth, who never bowed his head, even before his elders. "Your tongue," Apollonius said, "will one day be sharper than your sword. But remember, Caesar, a blade cuts only once. A word can kill 1,000 times." Caesar listened. He learned the rhythm of persuasion, the cadence of command. He mastered the art of the pause, the silence that bends a crowd's breath before it yields. In the great marble halls of Athens, beneath pillars that had heard the voices of Socrates and Aristotle, he began to understand the true empire, not of land, but of minds. He wrote to a friend in Rome, "Conquest begins not with armies, but with belief. The man who commands words commands men." The lesson of the serpent during his studies in Asia Minor, Caesar met a philosopher named Demetrius, who told him a story about a serpent trapped beneath a laurel tree. For years, the serpent waited, unseen, while men and gods passed by. When it finally struck, it killed a lion and wore its skin as armor. "The serpent," said Demetrius, "is patience made flesh. The laurel is glory. One feeds the other, but glory without patience becomes poison." Caesar smiled faintly. "Then I shall be both serpent and laurel," he replied. Demetrius nodded. "And thus Rome will fear you." That parable would haunt Caesar forever. In his dreams, he often saw a serpent coiling around a laurel wreath, its scales gleaming like bronze, its eyes burning with divine purpose. Sometimes, he could not tell which one devoured the other. The oracle of Vesta. In the 3rd year of his studies, Caesar traveled to Delphi, the navel of the world, to seek the wisdom of Apollo's priests. Yet it was not Apollo who answered him that day. It was the Sibyl of Vesta, an old priestess with eyes as pale as moonlight. She looked upon him and trembled. "You carry the blood of Venus," she whispered. "I see it burning through your veins. But you will not serve the gods. You will challenge them." Caesar knelt. "Then tell me, what do the gods fear?" The Sibyl's voice cracked like dry leaves. "They fear the man who believes himself their equal. They fear the laurel that grows from blood. They fear the serpent that wears the crown." He asked her if he would one day rule Rome. She smiled, not with joy, but with sorrow. "You will rule all that Rome is, her glory, her betrayal, her eternity. But you will not live to see the fruit of your conquest. The laurel you seek will rest upon your brow only once, and then upon your grave." Caesar stood silently. The wind howled through the temple, scattering ashes and incense. He bowed to the oracle and said, "If the gods have written my end, then let them also witness how I begin." When he left Delphi, thunder rolled in the distance, faint but steady, as if the heavens themselves had taken note. The school of politics returning to Rome, Caesar began to weave himself into the web of the Republic. He studied the factions, the hidden alliances, and the shifting loyalties that shaped the Senate. He learned to smile while listening to lies, to promise without committing, to speak truth wrapped in honey. He dined with senators, listened to generals, and paid the poor from his own purse, not from kindness, but from design. The serpent had learned to wait beneath the laurel. When one of his rivals mocked him for wearing purple robes and perfumed oils, "Are you a man or a queen, young Caesar?" he simply smiled and replied, "When I am king, you may kiss my hand and decide for yourself." The room fell silent. Even then, long before the throne, Caesar's words carried the weight of inevitability, the laurel and the sky. One evening, during a festival honoring Jupiter, Caesar stood before the statue of the god-king, watching priests crown the idol with laurel leaves. The crowd cheered, the torches flared, and a warm wind swept through the forum. Caesar looked up at the sky, and for a brief moment, he saw a red comet blaze across it, the same one that had marked his birth. A chill passed through him. The memory of the Sibyl's prophecy echoed in his mind. The laurel you seek will rest upon your brow only once. He reached up and touched his own hair, imagining the weight of that future wreath of power, of destiny, of death. And then, softly, he whispered to himself, "If the gods fear me, then they will learn to kneel." The torches flickered, and a sudden gust extinguished the flame nearest him. The priests murmured of omens, but Caesar only smiled. The birth of ambition. From that night onward, something in Caesar changed. He no longer studied simply to learn, but to prepare. No longer spoke to persuade, but to command. He understood that the Republic was not built by gods or ideals. It was built by men too weak to seize eternity. He would be different. He would seize it. And though he carried the lessons of philosophy and rhetoric, the serpent in his soul had awakened, silent, patient, deadly. In the temples, the statues of gods stood unblinking. In the Senate, the old men whispered his name with both admiration and fear, for they felt what he himself already knew. The child of Venus has learned the language of gods, and soon he will speak it to the world. Chapter 4. The captive who commanded even in chains. A lion does not bow. He waits until the cage forgets who it holds. The sea was restless that morning, a mirror of the gods' uncertainty. Caesar, now in his mid-20s, had left Rome behind for a time. Political storms brewed once again in the Republic, and though he had tasted the venom of ambition, he had not yet gathered enough strength to strike. So he sailed across the Aegean, seeking refuge among scholars in Asia Minor, carrying only scrolls, letters, and the calm arrogance of a man who knew destiny owed him a crown. But destiny rarely gives without testing. Off the coast, near Pharmozia, the horizon darkened with sails, black, lean, and swift. Pirates, Cilician pirates, the terror of the Eastern Sea, men who bowed to no law but gold. They came like shadows on the wind. The Roman ship was small, its crew few, and within minutes Caesar was surrounded, his guards slain, his scrolls scattered into the waves. He stood unarmed, defiant, his cloak torn by the sea breeze. The pirate captain, a tall man with a scar like lightning across his face, approached, grinning. "Your name?" he demanded. "Gaius Julius Caesar," came the calm reply. The captain laughed. "A senator's brat. Perhaps you'll fetch a ransom." "How much?" Caesar asked. The pirates muttered among themselves, whispering numbers. 20 talents, said the captain at last. Caesar arched an eyebrow, half amused. 20, he said. "Do you know whom you've captured? Demand 50, and be grateful I allow you to live long enough to receive it." The men stared. Then laughter erupted, cruel, mocking, echoing across the waves. But something in Caesar's tone silenced them. It was not arrogance, it was conviction. The voice of a man who did not believe himself their prisoner, but their ruler. They kept him captive on the island for 38 days. Yet, from the first sunrise to the last, Caesar refused to act like a hostage. He ate with them, joked with them, even joined in their games. He ordered them to keep quiet when he slept, and they obeyed. When they mocked him, he mocked them back, sharper and prouder. At night, as the sea glimmered under starlight, he would compose poems and speeches, reading them aloud before his captors. If they failed to applaud, he would glare and say, "Barbarians, you will hang for your lack of taste." The pirates thought him mad, and yet they laughed nervously, uncertain whether they were listening to a fool or a god. One evening, as they sat around a fire, the captain asked, "What will you do when we release you, Roman." Caesar smiled, eyes gleaming like molten bronze. "I will raise a fleet, return, and crucify every one of you." The men roared with laughter. The captain clapped him on the back and said, "You are a strange one, Caesar." But Caesar did not laugh. He simply looked into the flames, as if he could already see their shadows twisting upon crosses. Days passed. Caesar's companions eventually gathered the ransom, 50 talents of silver, as he demanded. When the coins were delivered, the pirates set him free, laughing as they watched him sail away. "Farewell, noble captive," they jeered. "Try not to get caught again." Caesar turned, his cloak billowing in the wind, and replied, "I will see you soon." He meant it. Within a few weeks, Caesar reached Miletus, and without hesitation, he went straight to the Roman authorities. But the governor, lazy and corrupt, merely shrugged. "Pirates, pirates, they plague everyone. What do you expect me to do?" Caesar's voice turned to steel. "If Rome will not avenge her citizens, then I will." He gathered a small fleet at his own expense, swift ships, loyal men, and the fury of humiliation burning in his chest. The gods themselves seemed to favor his purpose. The sea turned calm, and the winds blew true. He sailed back to the island like an avenging storm. The pirates were still there, laughing, drinking, dividing spoils, when Caesar's sails appeared on the horizon. At first, they did not recognize the white banners glinting in the sunlight. Then came the drums, then the arrows. By nightfall, the sea ran red. The next morning, Caesar stood upon the same beach where he had once been chained. The surviving pirates knelt before him, bound, trembling, their laughter long dead. The scarred captain met his gaze and whispered, You were serious." Caesar nodded. "Always." He ordered them crucified along the coast. Yet, in an act of mercy, he commanded that their throats be cut first, so they would die before the agony of the cross. "I am not without compassion," he said, as the bodies swung in the sea breeze, seagulls circling overhead. To his men, he spoke softly, "Let it be known, no man takes Caesar captive. Not pirates, not kings, not fate itself." The awakening when the news reached the mainland, whispers spread across the provinces. A Roman noble had hunted down pirates with his own fleet. Some called it madness, others called it glory. But those who met Caesar afterward swore that something in his gaze had changed, colder, clearer, almost divine. He had tasted power unrestrained by law, and he found it sweet. Standing on the deck as the sun sank into the western sea, Caesar whispered to himself, "I have seen the truth of the world. Men are not ruled by justice, they are ruled by will." The waves lapped against the hull, crimson with sunset. Behind him, the crucified pirates hung like dark silhouettes against the dying light, a grim choir praising his vengeance. Ahead, the horizon stretched toward Rome, the city that had birthed him and betrayed him, waiting for its conqueror to return. When he stepped onto Roman soil again, even the senators who despised him bowed their heads slightly as he passed, not from respect, but from instinct, the same instinct that made men kneel before lions. Caesar smiled faintly. He had been captive once. He would never be captive again. Chapter 5. The fire of ambition. In every man burns a spark, but in Caesar, it was a sun that refused to set. The streets of Rome welcomed him with the scent of dust, sweat, and the roar of ambition. It was not the city he had left behind. It was a city bleeding gold and corruption, marble palaces beside starving alleys, senators trading honor like coins, and generals parading through the forum with the arrogance of gods. To most, Rome was chaos. To Caesar, it was opportunity. He walked through the crowd in a plain white toga, unarmed, unnoticed, yet wherever his eyes turned, he saw patterns, alliances hidden in laughter, daggers behind smiles, and every handshake a promise poisoned by greed. Rome, he realized, was not ruled by law, but by debt and favor, and he would master both, the making of a politician. He began as a quaestor, a minor financial officer, humble in title, yet rich in potential. He managed the treasury with precision and charm, winning the hearts of those beneath him and the envy of those above. Caesar knew that power was not seized in a day. It was courted, like a lover too proud to be won easily. He spent his evenings in smoky taverns with soldiers, listening to their tales. His mornings among senators, whispering plans disguised as praise. He could flatter without lying, and insult without offense, a skill rarer than courage in Rome. But beneath the silk of his words burned the same fire that had once promised vengeance to pirates. The flame of ambition, no longer hidden, only shaped. Crassus, the banker of Rome. It was during one of those political evenings, a banquet lit by torches and heavy with wine, that Caesar met Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Crassus had built his empire upon ashes, buying burning houses and rebuilding them with slave labor. He saw the Republic as a marketplace, and every man as an investment. "Caesar," Crassus said, swirling his wine, "they say you are charming, reckless, and in debt." Caesar smiled, unashamed. "All true, but debts are chains that bind others to me." Crassus laughed, intrigued. Few dared to speak so boldly before him. He leaned closer. "And what do you seek, young Caesar?" "Everything," came the quiet answer. From that night, a silent alliance was born. Gold for glory, wealth for will. Crassus funded his political ambitions, and in return, Caesar offered something more valuable than coin: vision. Pompey the Great, soon after. Caesar met another man whose shadow stretched across the Republic, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, called Pompey the Great, a conqueror of the East, worshipped by his legions, yet uneasy among the scheming senators who envied his fame. When Caesar approached him, he did not kneel. He praised Pompey's victories with genuine admiration, but also with the subtlety of one who saw weakness where others saw strength. "You have conquered kingdoms, Pompey," Caesar said one evening, as they looked over the Tiber. "But Rome herself remains unconquered, and that is the greatest campaign of all." Pompey chuckled. "You speak like a philosopher, not a soldier." Caesar's eyes flashed. "A philosopher builds no empire." The older general studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Perhaps," Pompey said, "you are both." In that instant, respect was born, fragile, fated, and doomed. The rise of While the Senate drowned itself in greed, Caesar chose a different path. He became the voice of the people. He walked among the poor, fed them with borrowed silver, and spoke of Rome's forgotten glory. To them, he was not a noble, he was one of their own. His speeches thundered across the forum. "Rome is not marble and gold, it is the blood that beats in her citizens. The Republic is dying, not from war, but from rot." The crowds cheered his name, Caesar. Caesar, echoing like a storm across the Capitoline Hill. Senators whispered that he was dangerous, that he dreamed of kingship. They were right. But Caesar's genius lay in patience. He knew the Republic would not fall to force, it would fall to faith. and he was already becoming the god they would believe in. The mask of modesty to his enemies, Caesar appeared humble, attending trials, defending clients, weeping for the oppressed. He spoke of justice and tradition, even as he twisted both to his will. Behind every act of mercy was calculation. Behind every smile, strategy. He gave Rome what it craved most, a savior wrapped in sincerity. Yet, in the silence of his villa at night, when torches burned low, he would stand before the mirror and see not a savior, but a sovereign. The reflection stared back with eyes that gleamed like tempered steel. "I will not be content to rule Rome," he whispered. "I will be Rome, the spark before the storm." By the year 60 BC, the city trembled with unrest. Factions divided the Senate, veterans demanded land, and corruption soaked every decree. Caesar saw that no single man could rule Rome through law alone. It required a trinity of power, wealth, military, and influence, all bound to one will. He had Crassus for wealth, he had Pompey for the sword, and he had himself for the will. Thus began the first triumvirate, 3 men sworn not by love, but by ambition. The Republic called it an alliance. History would call it the beginning of empire. The fire within, as Caesar looked out from the Capitoline steps one twilight. Torches flickering below him, he felt the pulse of Rome in his veins, wild, eternal, divine. The same city that had mocked him now bowed in awe, though it did not yet know it. The wind carried the scent of rain and prophecy. He closed his eyes and whispered to the gods, "If destiny is mine, let the world burn before I yield." Somewhere beyond the Tiber, thunder answered. That night, the lion in chains became the lion unbound. Chapter 6: The Triumvirate of Shadows. When 3 suns rise over Rome, the world itself trembles, for only one may remain. Rome, once ruled by the voice of the Senate, now bent beneath the will of 3 men. They called it the Triumvirate, the rule of 3, but in truth, it was not born from unity. It was born from fear, greed, and ambition. The pact in the garden. The meeting was held in secret, far from the ears of the Curia and the eyes of Rome, in the garden of Lucullus, abandoned villa, beneath a blood-red sunset. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus gathered. Crassus, draped in silks that whispered of gold and debt, broke the silence first. "Rome is dying," he said, "and the Senate bleeds her dry. Together, we can make her live again and profit from her revival." Pompey's scarred hands rested upon the hilt of his sword. "You speak as a merchant, Crassus. I fight for honor, not coin." Caesar, standing between them, smiled faintly. "Then we 3 complete one another. Crassus has the wealth, Pompey has the legions, and I have the people." His words hung in the air like an oath to the gods. There was no signature, no decree, only a silent understanding, sealed with wine and ambition. The first triumvirate was born, a trinity, not of faith, but of power. Rome divided. Over the next months, the Republic itself bent under their unseen rule. Pompey secured the loyalty of his soldiers, veterans who would follow him to the underworld. Crassus tightened his grip on Rome's finances, buying senators like slaves, and Caesar, with disarming charm, walked through the Senate halls as though he were its savior, though he was, in truth, its executioner. Through clever decrees and alliances, Caesar was appointed proconsul of Gaul, giving him command of legions and an open road to glory. "Let me pacify the north," he told them. "Rome needs peace at her borders." But in his heart burned a different vow. through conquest. I will become the storm that shapes the world, the shadow beneath friendship to the crowds. The triumvirate seemed like harmony, three pillars holding the republic high. But behind every feast, every victory speech, every handshake, shadows lengthened. Crassus grew envious of Pompey's fame. Pompey feared Caesar's rising charisma. And Caesar, ever smiling, studied both, learning their hearts like a scholar, reading a map to conquest. He flattered Crassus as a mentor, praised Pompey as a hero, and fed their pride until they could no longer see the strings in his hands. He was not merely part of the triumvirate, he was its beating heart, and the dagger waiting behind it. Whispers in the Senate murmured of tyranny. Cicero, sharp-tongued and unyielding, called them the three-headed beast, but none dared act. The triumvirate had turned the republic into a chessboard, every senator a pawn, every province a move. When a decree passed, it bore Caesar's rhetoric, Crassus's gold, and Pompey's sword. The people cheered, the aristocrats seethed, and Rome, in her splendor, sank deeper into the jaws of monarchy she had once sworn to destroy. Gaul, the crucible of greatness, while Rome burned in politics, Caesar marched north, leaving his allies to their games. The forests of Gaul awaited him, wild, untamed, and alive with the fury of tribes that defied the eagle of Rome. He wrote to Crassus and Pompey, "Hold Rome for me. I will bring her glory beyond imagining." And so began the wars that would make him immortal. While his legions clashed against the barbarians, news of victory after victory returned like thunder. Caesar's name was no longer just spoken, it was worshipped. Each triumph widened the rift between him and his allies. Pompey grew uneasy, his pride wounded by Caesar's rising legend. Crassus, jealous of both, sought to prove his worth through conquest of his own. In the east, where Parthian arrows waited, the fall of Crassus in the desert of Carrhae, the sands turned red. Crassus, the richest man in Rome, fell to Parthian blades, his mouth filled with molten gold in mockery of his greed. When news reached Caesar, he was silent for a long time. Then he murmured, "The gods take their tribute in irony." Pompey, meanwhile, wept not for Crassus, but for what his death meant. The triumvirate was broken. 2 sons remained, and both were fated to eclipse. The seeds of war when Caesar returned from Gaul, crowned with victories, the people greeted him as a god. Pompey, now the sole master of Rome, watched from the Senate steps, his face carved in stone. "Caesar grows too powerful," he whispered to Cato. Cato's eyes narrowed. "Then you must destroy him before he destroys the Republic." But Pompey's heart still remembered their friendship, the nights of wine, the laughter in victory, the trust that had once seemed unbreakable. And Caesar, across the Alps, remembered too, but without mercy. He wrote to Pompey, "Rome cannot have 2 masters, my friend. Choose the Republic or me." The lion awaits by the winter of 50 BC. Rome trembled beneath the weight of choice. The Senate demanded Caesar lay down his command and return to stand trial. But Caesar laughed. He knew to return without his legions was to die. Instead, he stood at the frozen banks of the Rubicon River, staring toward the land of his enemies. Behind him, his soldiers waited loyal, silent, bound to their general's fate. Before him lay Rome, his Rome, guarded by the man who had once been his brother in arms. "The die is cast," Caesar whispered, and as he crossed the Rubicon, the triumvirate of shadows fell, giving birth to the greatest civil war the Republic had ever seen. Chapter 7. The Crossing of the Rubicon. between obedience and destiny. He chose immortality. The night was cold and heavy with mist. Before him stretched a narrow river, black under the moonlight, its waters whispering of forbidden fate. On one side lay Gaul, the land of his triumphs. On the other, Italy and Rome, his home, his heart, and his doom. The Rubicon was no mighty river, yet its waters divided worlds. Behind Caesar, his legions waited, the men who had followed him through storm and snow, through the forests of Gaul and the fires of conquest. They trusted him not as a general, but as something greater, a destiny made flesh. Before him, silence stretched like the breath of gods, the Senate's decree. Days earlier, in Rome, the Senate had passed its decree. Caesar must lay down his command, disband his armies, and return to the city as a private man. They called it law. He called it betrayal. The senators feared his victories, his power, his love among the people. And behind their trembling parchment stood Pompey, old comrade, now rival, commanding the forces of the Republic. It was Pompey who had sworn to protect Rome, and Caesar who would test what protection truly meant. When messengers brought the order to his camp in Ravenna, the soldiers watched their general in silence. He read the decree once, then twice, and set it down beside the fire. "The Senate demands my obedience," he said. "But Rome demands my return." Voices of doubt. That night, his commanders gathered around him. Mark Antony, ever bold, struck the table. The Senate is no longer the Republic. It's a nest of cowards. Lead us, Caesar, and we will follow you through hell itself. Curio, cautious, frowned. To cross the Rubicon is treason. If you fail, history will curse your name. Caesar looked up slowly. The firelight danced across his face, half shadow, half god. Treason, he repeated, almost softly. They call it treason when a man defies corruption. But what is Rome, if not a dream worth defying? His words silenced them all. He rose, his crimson cloak falling behind him like a tide of blood. If we cross that river, we leave behind not only Gaul, but the Republic itself. The world will never be the same. Antony's voice was firm. Then let the world change. The river of fate near midnight. Caesar rode alone to the river's edge. The Rubicon glimmered faintly, its current slow and deceptive, like time itself, peaceful yet eternal. The cold mist clung to his armor, and his horse shuddered beneath him. For a long while, he said nothing. He stared into the dark water, as though it were a mirror reflecting all his victories, all his sins. He thought of Pompey, the brother-in-arms, who had once shared his dreams of greatness. He thought of Crassus, buried beneath Parthian sands. He thought of Rome, the eternal city, now ruled by men too small for its grandeur. A whisper rose within him, not from the wind, but from memory. His mother's voice, from long ago. Those blessed by the gods walk paths of glory and tragedy. He smiled faintly. Then let both be mine. The moment he turned back toward his soldiers, their armor gleaming like scattered stars. They waited, silent, loyal, bound by oaths stronger than iron. Caesar raised his hand, and the sound of the river filled the night. "This," he said, his voice clear as thunder, "is the line that Rome has drawn between us. If I cross it, I bring war upon my homeland. If I stay, I surrender to those who would destroy her." He looked to the heavens. A comet streaked faintly across the sky, red, like blood upon marble. And in that burning instant, he knew. "Alia iacta est," he whispered. "The die is cast." He spurred his horse forward. The first hoof struck the water, a sound small as a heartbeat, yet loud enough to awaken history. The river rippled, reflecting fire and moonlight, as if the gods themselves were watching. Behind him, one by one, his legions followed, their standards rising through the mist like the wings of destiny. The eagle of Rome had turned against its masters. The death of the Republic by dawn. The Rubicon lay behind them. There was no turning back. As they marched toward Rome, peasants knelt by the roadside, whispering his name like prayer. In the forum, senators scattered like leaves in wind. Pompey, hearing the news, rose from his chair in shock. He has crossed. Yes, my lord, with his legions. Pompey's eyes darkened. Then Rome has no master but war. The city that had ruled the world now trembled before one man's will. The dream of empire that evening. Caesar stood upon a hill overlooking the land he had claimed by defiance. The horizon blazed with the dying light of sunset, crimson and gold, like a prophecy fulfilled. Antony rode beside him. You've done what none dared. You've brought Rome to her knees. Caesar shook his head. Not to her knees, Antony, to her rebirth. He watched the sun dip below the mountains, the same sun that had shone on Romulus and Remus, on every conqueror before him. The Republic is dust, he said softly. Now begins the empire epilogue of the crossing that night. Thunder rolled across the Italian sky. The river behind them flowed quietly, as if erasing all trace of what had been done. But the world would never forget. For when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he did not merely defy a senate, he defied the very nature of man, the line between duty and destiny. And from that crossing came both his glory and his doom. Chapter the 8th. The Civil War of Brothers. When brothers take up swords, the gods themselves weep. The die had been cast. Rome was no longer ruled by law, but by the sound of marching legions and the weight of ambition. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he set fire to the Republic. Now that fire spread through Italy, through Greece, through the hearts of men who once called each other friend, the empty city Rome lay silent as Caesar entered. The streets that once thundered with chariots were now hushed, the marble statues watching in ghostly stillness. The Senate had fled, carrying the sacred treasury and their loyalty to Pompey. Caesar rode through the forum, the hooves of his horse echoing off the stones where generations had spoken of freedom. There were no cheers, no parades, only the whisper of destiny. Mark Antony rode beside him. They've abandoned the city, Caesar. They say Pompey has gone east to Greece to gather the legions. Caesar looked toward the Capitoline Hill. Then the Republic follows him, and we must follow both. He dismounted and stood before the temple of Jupiter. Rome is not marble and gold, he said softly. Rome is will, and my will does not flee. Two sons of Rome, for years, Pompey and Caesar, had shared a bond, like iron forged in blood, victory, and the dream of power. They had divided the world once, the great triumvirate, Caesar in Gaul, Pompey in Spain, Crassus in the east. Now one was dead, and the other two stood as twin suns, too bright to share the same sky. Pompey commanded the Senate's legions, the wealth of nobles, and the name of tradition. Caesar commanded the veterans of Gaul, the hearts of the people, and the storm of fate. Each man believed himself to be Rome. The march of Fire Caesar's campaign was swift and merciless. He swept through Italy in weeks, city after city opening its gates. He offered clemency, and those who accepted lived. Those who resisted were consumed. Mercy, he told his soldiers, is my sword sharper than steel. By spring, he controlled all of Italy. But Pompey had escaped across the Adriatic, where the Senate gathered its armies in Greece. "Let him run," Caesar said. "He will find no refuge from destiny." Still, the sea was against him. Pompey held the navy, and storms lashed the coast. For months, Caesar's legions waited on the shore, hungry and restless. The gods tested his patience, and he endured the crossing to Greece. At last, under cover of darkness, Caesar's fleet slipped across the Adriatic. Winds tore his sails, but he pressed onward, his cloak snapping like a banner of flame. When they landed, his men were half-starved. Pompey's army weighed twice their number, fortified and fed. But Caesar smiled. He gathered his generals beneath the rising sun. "You fear his legions because they are many," he said. "I fear them because they are Romans. But Romans have never beaten Caesar's men." Cheers rose, low and fierce, the kind born not from pride, but faith. The civil war had begun. The Battle of Pharsalus. The fields of Pharsalus were dry that summer, the air thick with dust and prophecy. Before dawn, both armies formed their lines. Pompey stood at the center of his host, a figure of marble pride. Across the plain, Caesar rode before his veterans' armor, gleaming eyes cold as iron. For a heartbeat, they looked upon each other, two halves of a broken Rome. Caesar raised his sword. "Pompey was once my brother," he said. "Today, he is my mirror. Let us see which reflection the gods favor." The trumpets sounded. The earth shook as legions collided. Spears shattered. Shields rang like thunder. Arrows blackened the sky. Pompey's cavalry charged glittering, magnificent, but Caesar had foreseen it. His reserve line of infantry, hidden behind the ranks, struck upward with short blades, cutting men from their saddles. The cavalry fell back in chaos. Caesar's center advanced a red tide of discipline and fury. Pompey watched in disbelief as his mighty host began to crumble. "Impossible," he whispered. "The gods abandoned me." But the gods had already chosen the fall of a brother. By midday, the field was his. Pompey's army broke and fled, their banners torn, their cries lost in dust. Caesar dismounted and walked among the dead. Romans, all slain by Romans. He knelt beside a fallen standard-bearer and pressed his hand to the man's chest. "Forgive me," he murmured, "for I have conquered my own blood." Pompey escaped to the sea, his spirit broken. In the stillness after the storm, Caesar looked eastward, where his old friend fled. "Do not make me kill you," he said to the wind. "Do not force me to become the thing I fought, the shadow of victory." Rome rejoiced. The Senate trembled. But for Caesar, victory brought no peace. In the quiet of his tent that night, he sat alone, staring at the flicker of lamplight. He thought of the days when he and Pompey had shared wine, laughter, and dreams of glory. Now, only ghosts kept him company. Mark Antony entered quietly. "The army celebrates, Caesar. They await your command." Caesar did not look up. There will be no celebration. A man does not rejoice when he conquers his brother. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the hills, a sound like the weeping of gods. The price of power, a messenger, arrived at dawn. "Pompey has fled to Egypt, my lord. The pharaoh offers him refuge." Caesar rose slowly. "Then Egypt shall see the end of this war." He stepped from the tent, the first rays of morning gilding his armor. Around him, the camp stirred, tired men, hardened men, but loyal still. He looked to the east, where the Nile awaited. "The Republic is dead," he said softly, "but perhaps something greater may rise from its ashes." He turned to Antony. Prepare the ships. We sail for Alexandria. And so the conqueror of Gaul marched once more, not for Rome, but for fate itself. Chapter 9. The Queen and the Conqueror. Power recognizes power, as flame greets flame. The sun of Egypt rose like a coin of molten gold, casting its light over the Nile, a river older than empires, older even than Rome's dreams of eternity. Into this land of ancient gods came Julius Caesar, the man who had slain the Republic and was now chasing the ghost of his brother, the death of Pompey. The sea was calm when Caesar's galley reached Alexandria. He had come not as conqueror, but as pursuer, seeking Pompey, the last rival who bore the name of Rome's freedom. But fate arrived first. A small skiff approached his ship, carrying a single basket. Within it lay the head of Pompey the Great, wrapped in linen, lips pale beneath the Egyptian sun. Caesar stared down at the offering, the final insult to a friendship that had once bound the world. His soldiers waited for him to speak, but none dared breathe. At last, Caesar said softly, "They thought to please me. They do not know that I mourn him." He turned away, his face carved from marble. Pompey was my rival, but he was also Rome, and Rome should never die by a foreign hand. The Nile breeze carried the smell of death. The conqueror closed his eyes, and for the first time, the great Caesar looked weary. The pharaoh's court, Alexandria, jewel of the Mediterranean, was divided. The boy King Ptolemy XIII sat on the throne, advised by greedy courtiers who whispered like serpents. His sister Cleopatra had been exiled, accused of treachery, her armies scattered. When Caesar arrived, the city seethed with intrigue. The young pharaoh sought to impress him with gifts, hoping to earn Rome's favor, the very favor he had stained with Pompey's blood. Caesar sat upon a marble seat in the royal hall, the echoes of foreign tongues around him. Gold glimmered, incense curled in the air, but beneath the perfume of diplomacy, he smelled the rot of betrayal. He rose and said to Ptolemy's advisors, "You have slain a Roman consul upon your shores. The Nile itself weeps for such treachery. Yet I am not here to avenge. I am here to judge." The courtiers bowed in fear, but behind the fear, the old gods smiled, for they knew another power was already moving, silent as the desert wind, the arrival of Cleopatra. That night, as a storm brewed over the sea, Caesar sat in his chambers, reading dispatches by lamplight. Outside, thunder rolled, and with it came destiny. A servant entered, breathless. "My lord, a gift has been delivered." 2 guards carried in a long, rolled carpet. When they unfurled it upon the floor, a figure spilled out, a woman, her dark hair falling like silk, her eyes gleaming with the intelligence of 1,000 stars. Cleopatra. She rose, graceful as a serpent, and met his gaze. "Forgive the entrance, Roman. The doors of my brother's palace are closed to me. I thought perhaps yours would not be." For a moment, Caesar said nothing. He had faced legions, kings, assassins, but never eyes like hers. They burned with wit, danger, and something rarer still, equality. "You risked death to enter my room," he said. "I risked a kingdom," she replied. The alliance of fire through the long Egyptian night. They spoke, not as man and woman, but as rulers of worlds. She spoke of her exile, of betrayal within the palace, of her dream to restore Egypt's greatness. He listened, seeing in her not just beauty, but vision, a mirror of his own relentless will. "Rome devours the world," she said, "but Egypt seduces it." Caesar smiled. Then perhaps we are both conquerors, each in our way. Outside, the storm broke. Lightning flared across the sky, and the rain drummed against the marble balcony. Within the chamber, two empires merged in whispered plans and soft breath, the birth of a new destiny. The war for the throne by dawn, their pact was sealed. Caesar would restore Cleopatra to the throne. In return, Egypt would stand as Rome's ally, and her queen would become the heart of its politics. When Ptolemy's generals discovered her return, war ignited in the streets of Alexandria. Flames devoured the great library, and the city became a labyrinth of smoke and blood. Caesar, outnumbered, fought beside Cleopatra's loyalists. He rallied his men on the steps of the palace, sword in hand, cloak torn by arrows. "You are not fighting for Egypt," he shouted. "You fight for civilization itself." The legions roared, and the tide turned. Ptolemy fled toward the Nile, but drowned in its depths, swallowed by the river that had birthed his gods. When silence fell, Cleopatra stood beside Caesar amid the ruins. Her crown gleamed beneath the rising sun. "You have given me back my kingdom," she said softly. "And you," Caesar answered, "have reminded me why I seek one." The queen and the conqueror days became weeks. The war ended, but their alliance deepened. They sailed together upon the Nile, the queen of the east and the master of the west. She showed him temples older than Rome's stones, stars that guided pharaohs long before Caesar's birth. And in return, he spoke of the republic, of dreams carved from will alone. "You speak of gods," he told her, "but I have become one." She smiled faintly. Then even gods can be lonely. Their hands met to rulers who sought immortality, finding only the warmth of mortal touch. In that moment, under the eternal sky of Egypt, the conqueror of Rome found his equal. The child of empires, when Caesar departed, Cleopatra watched from the balcony of her restored palace. Her hand rested upon her stomach, for within her a new legacy was growing. A son, Caesarion, a child of two worlds, the blood of Jupiter and the breath of Ra. The Nile shimmered as the Roman fleet vanished into the horizon. Above, the hawk of Horus circled the sky, as if blessing the union of empire and eternity. From that union, myth was born, not of love alone, but of ambition shared. For even the greatest of men bow before the destiny written in the stars. Chapter X. The return of the dictator. The greatest danger to a hero is not the enemy's sword, it is the crown he learns to wear. The Tiber shimmered beneath the spring sun as Caesar's ships returned from the east. The people of Rome crowded the banks, their voices rising in thunderous cheers. They hailed him not as a general, but as a god returned. The triumph of Rome. Golden banners lined the Via Sacra. Trumpets blared, their echoes rolling across the 7 hills. Behind Caesar's chariot marched prisoners from distant lands, Egyptians, Numidians, Greeks, the spoils of a world subdued. The crowd cried, "Hail Caesar, savior of Rome, lord of the earth." Roses rained from the balconies, children ran before his horses. Old men wept at the sight of peace restored. Mark Antony rode beside him, his voice fierce with pride. "You have conquered not just nations, Caesar, you have conquered time. Rome itself bows before you." Caesar smiled faintly, but his eyes were distant. He saw not the celebration, but the cost written in blood and memory. Pompey's ghost still walked beside him, silent beneath the roar of the crowd. Dictator for life. The Senate met in solemn ceremony within the marble heart of Rome. Cicero's voice trembled as he read the decree, "The people of Rome, in gratitude for his victories and his mercy. Hereby name Gaius Julius Caesar, dictator for life. The chamber erupted in applause. But beneath the thunder of voices, whispers stirred the whispers of men who feared they had crowned a king. Caesar rose slowly, the purple cloak of triumph draped upon his shoulders. He spoke not as a tyrant, but as a statesman burdened by destiny. Rome has suffered from the pride of men and the greed of senate and soldier alike. If I must bear this title, it shall not be for power, but for order. He lifted his gaze to the senators before him. I offer not chains, but peace, for Rome shall be eternal, and I, its servant. The words were noble, yet behind them, fate sharpened its knife. The reforms of Caesar in the months that followed, Caesar reshaped Rome as if he were a god molding clay. He rebuilt crumbling temples, restored grain to the starving, forgave debts that crushed farmers. He invited scholars and philosophers from every corner of the world, seeking to make Rome not only a conqueror of lands, but of knowledge. He declared that citizenship was not birthright alone, it was virtue. Rome would be a city for all, not merely the chosen few. The people adored him, the Senate obeyed him, and yet, beneath the marble floors of the Curia, envy and fear began to coil like serpents. The whispers of the Republic, Cassius watched from the shadows of the Forum, his heart burning with resentment. He calls himself dictator for life, he spat. Does that not mean king? Brutus, standing beside him, said nothing. His face was carved from doubt. He loved Caesar as a father, but he loved Rome more. Cassius leaned closer, his voice a whisper of poison. Today he crowns himself with laurel, tomorrow it will be gold. Elsewhere, senators murmured the same. He pardons enemies, yes, but who pardons a god? He claims to serve Rome, yet all roads lead to his name. What began as admiration slowly turned to suspicion, and suspicion in the Republic was death, the shadow of divinity. At a great festival, Caesar appeared before the people, radiant in white robes and a wreath of evergreen. As he ascended the dais, the crowd chanted, "Caesar, Caesar, Caesar." Mark Antony, drunk with devotion, lifted a golden diadem, the symbol of kingship, and placed it before him. The people gasped. The Senate froze. Caesar looked upon the crown for a long moment. Then, with deliberate calm, he pushed it aside. "There is no king in Rome," he said. "Only Caesar." The crowd erupted in joy, but among the senators, fear deepened. If he refused the crown today, would he not take it tomorrow? For they saw in his gesture not humility, but control, the power to deny what was already his. Between love and power, that night, in the quiet of his villa, Caesar stood before a map of the world. Pins marked every province, every road, every frontier, yet to be tamed. Cleopatra's letters lay open on the table, words of admiration, of longing, of prophecy. "You rule men," she had written, "but who will rule your heart?" Mark Antony entered. The Senate grows restless. "Caesar," they whisper again. Caesar smiled. "Let them whisper. Rome has always feared what it cannot control." Antony frowned. "They call you God." Caesar turned toward the window, where the moon hung over the city like a silver coin. "Then perhaps gods are only men who refuse to kneel." The omens, strange things began to happen. A comet blazed across the night sky, red as blood. A lioness birthed her cubs in the temple of Mars, and a soothsayer, pale with terror, grasped Caesar's hand and whispered, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar laughed softly. "I fear no day, save the one I do not live to see. But the words lingered in the air, like smoke before a storm. The lonely summit, by the year's end, Caesar had everything: the love of the people, the obedience of armies, the wealth of the known world. And yet, he stood alone. He walked through the forum at dawn, the marble gleaming beneath his sandals. He thought of Marius, of Sulla, of Pompey, all who had sought glory and found ruin. Was he any different? "They call me a tyrant," he murmured to the empty square. "But I only wished to give Rome what she deserved, eternity." From the shadows, Brutus watched, his heart breaking, even as destiny hardened his resolve. The die had been cast once more, but this time, the blood that would fall would not belong to enemies. It would belong to a father, a friend, a god made mortal. Thus, power reached its peak and found no summit left to climb. For even Caesar, master of the world, could not escape the gravity of men's hearts. Chapter 11. The Ides of March. No empire falls in a single night. It begins with silence and ends with a heartbeat. The dawn of March 15th rose blood-red over Rome. The air was heavy, still, as though the gods themselves held their breath. The night before, Caesar dreamed of flight, of soaring above the forum on wings of fire. Below, he saw Rome burning, her temples collapsing beneath a crimson sky. Then the wings turned to ashes, and he fell endlessly into shadow. He woke before dawn, breath shallow, heart pounding. Beside him, Calpurnia wept softly. "Do not go to the Senate today," she pleaded. "I saw your statue bleed. I heard cries in the streets. The omens are wrong, my love. Stay." Caesar smiled gently, brushing her tears away. "You are wise, Calpurnia, but I have lived too long by defying fear. If fate calls my name, it will find me in the forum, not hiding in my house." He rose, donning his white toga, trimmed in crimson, the robe of triumph. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. The Ides of March had begun. The warning. As he stepped into his chariot, a shadow moved through the crowd, an old man, robed in gray. It was the soothsayer. He caught Caesar's arm, eyes wild. "Beware the Ides of March, Caesar. The gods are restless." Caesar laughed, the sound both amused and weary. "The Ides have come, old friend, and still I live." The soothsayer whispered, "Aye, but they are not yet gone." The chariot rolled away, the wheels groaning over cobblestones slick with morning dew. Behind him, ravens wheeled in the darkening sky. The gathering storm within the curia of Pompey. Men whispered in corners, their faces pale beneath the marble light. Cassius's hand trembled as he tested the dagger hidden in his cloak. "He will not listen," Cassius muttered. "He will make himself king. Rome will kneel." Brutus stood apart, his eyes distant, his soul divided. He could still hear Caesar's laughter, still feel the warmth of friendship. But beneath it all, the ghost of the Republic whispered, "Strike now, or be ruled forever." The Senate chamber filled. Each senator carried not parchment or seal, but steel. The funeral oration, he raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. For a long moment, he said nothing, only looked upon Caesar's face, pale as marble, serene as the gods. Then, softly, he began, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him." The crowd murmured. He paused, his voice trembling. "The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered for it." He gestured to the bier. "You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him?" A hush fell. Men bowed their heads. Women wept openly. The words rolled through the forum like thunder. Antony's tone changed, soft at first, then burning with fire. "Look, here, I bring his cloak. You know this mantle. I remember the first time he wore it, on a summer's eve in Gaul. It was on this very day he overcame the Nervi." He held up the blood-stained garment. The crowd gasped. "Look, this was the rent made by Casca. Through this one, Cassius struck. See, the well-beloved Brutus stabbed here. When he withdrew his cursed steel, mark how Caesar's blood followed." As though rushing forth to see whether Brutus so unkindly knocked or no, Antony's voice broke. He turned to the heavens. "O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason." The forum erupted. Cries of rage filled the air. The name Brutus became a curse spat between clenched teeth. The fire of the people, Antony stepped back and signaled. A group of soldiers lifted Caesar's body upon a pyre of cedar and olive branches. "He was not a tyrant," Antony cried, "but a savior. He brought order from chaos, peace from war. Shall such a man be left unhonored?" The crowd roared. They tore benches, shields, even their own homes to feed the fire. Women threw jewels. Men cast weapons into the flames. The pyre blazed to life, a column of fire that split the night. Children screamed. Old men fell to their knees, and the people cried out as one voice, "Hail Caesar!" The fire consumed the body, but not the spirit. The flames leaped higher, turning from gold to white, from white to pure celestial blue. The birth of the divine. Suddenly, the wind shifted. A single spark tore from the pyre and spiraled upward, higher, faster, until it became a comet blazing across the Roman sky. The people fell silent, eyes wide. "It is him," whispered an old woman. "Caesar rises to the heavens." The crowd knelt, trembling. The comet burned for 7 nights above Rome. They called it the Sidious Ulium, the star of Julius. The Senate, terrified, yet in awe, declared him Divus Julius, Julius the Divine. Temples were built, priests were named, and every Roman, when they looked to the stars, whispered his name with reverence and fear. The vow of vengeance. Antony stood before the dying embers of the pyre, his face lit by the last light of flame. "They thought to kill you," he said softly, "but all they did was crown you." Behind him, Octavian Caesar's adopted son stepped from the shadows. His eyes were calm, calculating. "The age of gods begins now," Octavian said. "But first, the traitors must fall." Antony turned to him. The fire reflected in both their eyes. "Then let the world burn until Rome is avenged." The 2 men clasped hands, the general and the heir, as the ashes of Caesar drifted into the wind. Above them, the comet flared once more, as if in approval. Empires are not born of peace. They are forged in fire, and in that fire, gods are made. Chapter the 12th. The funeral of fire. From the ashes of one man shall rise the fire of an empire. The body of Julius Caesar lay cold upon the marble of the forum. The air was heavy with incense and grief. Rome, once the proud heart of the world, now beat like a dying drum. The morning of Rome, for 3 days and nights, his body rested beneath the Capitoline sky. Citizens came in endless procession. Soldiers who had marched across Gaul, mothers who had named their sons after him, beggars who had once been slaves freed by his law. They laid laurel wreaths, coins, weapons, and prayers at his feet. Children whispered stories of his victories, as if recounting the deeds of a god. Above them, the bronze statue of Caesar gleamed faintly, reflecting the torches of the mourners. It seemed almost alive, watching, listening. Mark Antony stood beside the bier, his face hidden in shadow. For 3 days he had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the daggers, the blood, the marble turning red beneath his friend's body. They called it justice, he murmured, but it was envy that killed him. He turned to the crowd. Tomorrow, he said, Rome shall bid farewell to her father. The gathering of the people, the forum, overflowed with citizens. Balconies trembled beneath the weight of those who climbed to see. Senators stood apart, cloaked in guilt and fear. The conspirators had fled to the hills, but their names still echoed through the streets like curses. A golden bier was placed upon the rostra, the speaking platform, where Caesar had once proclaimed new laws. Now, his lifeless body lay there, draped in white, bound with ribbons of crimson. Trumpets blared. The sound carried through every corner of Rome, a funeral song for the man who had ruled the world. Mark Antony stepped forward. The entrance of Caesar, the doors opened. Light poured in, and with it came Julius Caesar, the man who had bent the world to his will. He moved through the chamber like a lion entering a den of lambs, unaware that every gaze hid a blade. Hail, Caesar! The senators cried, voices trembling with false devotion. He nodded, smiling, unaware that his smile would be his last. He took his seat beneath the statue of Pompey, the very man he had defeated years ago. Above him, the marble eyes seemed almost alive, watching, waiting. The betrayal unfolds. Metellus Cimber approached first, bowing deeply. Most noble Caesar, I beg the pardon of my brother, wrongfully banished. Caesar waved his hand. That matter is closed. Rise. Metellus dropped to his knees. I beg you. Caesar's voice grew firm. These kneelings and courtesies might move ordinary men, but not Caesar. Cassius stepped forward. Then shall not mercy move a god. A flicker of unease passed through the crowd. Caesar frowned. What? Suddenly, Casca struck. A dagger flashed the first cut, shallow but sharp. Caesar gasped, turning in disbelief. Casca, villain, what is this? Then came another blow, and another. Steel rained upon him like thunder. The fall of Caesar, the chamber erupted into chaos. Senators lunged, cloaks flaring red with blood. Caesar fought like a cornered lion, seizing a dagger, driving it into one attacker's throat. But they were too many. Cassius stabbed his ribs. Decimus slashed his arm. And then Brutus. He pushed through the circle, dagger trembling in his hand, his face pale as death. Their eyes met, the general and the son he had never had. Caesar's voice broke, barely a whisper. Et tu, brute. He staggered back, blood flooding his toga. The senators froze as he looked around the room, not with anger, but with sorrow. Then fall, Caesar, he said quietly. He sank to the floor, collapsing at the base of Pompey's statue, the blood of one conqueror mingling with the stone of another. The room fell silent, the silence of the gods outside. Thunder cracked across the heavens. A gust of wind howled through the curia, extinguishing every torch. Brutus stood motionless, dagger dripping red. Cassius breathed heavily, eyes wide. It is done. Rome is free. But no cheer rose, no joy followed. Only the echo of Caesar's name, whispered by the marble, carried by the wind. Mark Antony, waiting outside, heard the cries. When he entered, he found his friend lying still, surrounded by cowards who called themselves saviors. He fell to his knees beside the body. "O mighty Caesar," he murmured, "dost thou lie so low? The hands that once held the world now lie still, and freedom bleeds beside you." The conspirators fled. Antony rose, eyes blazing with vengeance. "Cry havoc," he whispered, "and let slip the dogs of war, the death of a mortal, the birth of a god." They carried his body through the forum, draped in white and crimson. The people wept and tore their garments. Mothers pressed their children's faces to the ground in mourning. At the pyre, flames rose high into the night, consuming the flesh of the man who had been mortal, and revealing the god that legend demanded. A comet blazed across the heavens, burning, defiant, eternal, and the people cried, "Behold, Caesar! He ascends to the stars." From that night onward, no man in Rome could look upon the sky without remembering the Ides of March, the day Rome lost her father and gained her myth. They killed the man, but not the idea, for power, once touched by greatness, never dies. It merely waits for another to rise. Chapter 13. The Rise of the Triumvirate to Avenge a God. Men must first become monsters. The ashes of an empire, the pyre of Caesar, had barely cooled, yet the air of Rome still stank of smoke and vengeance. The Senate trembled. The conspirators, Brutus, Cassius, and their noble allies had fled, believing the Republic reborn. But Rome was not reborn. She was broken. In the streets, the people whispered of omens. A comet still burned faintly above the night sky, the star of Julius, refusing to fade. Some said it was a sign that Caesar's soul had ascended among the gods. Others said it was an eye, watching, hungering for justice. In that silence between thunder and storm, 3 men rose to fill the void. Mark Antony, the lion-hearted general, bound by loyalty and rage. Octavian, Caesar's young heir, sharp as a blade and patient as the dawn. Lepidus, the quiet administrator, shrewd and cold, a man who understood power without glory. Together, they would forge a pact that would shake the world. The covenant of blood. It was night when Antony summoned them to Caesar's villa, the very place where the great man had dreamed of his empire eternal. The marble halls stood empty, echoing with ghosts. Antony poured wine, but none of them drank. Instead, he set Caesar's dagger upon the table, the same blade that had defended Gaul and cut the throats of kings. "We stand in the ruins of a god," Antony said, "and gods demand sacrifice." Octavian met his gaze, calm, calculating. "You want vengeance, I want justice. The Senate will call us tyrants, but they forget Rome belongs to Caesar still." Lepidus' voice was quiet, practical. "Then we do what Caesar would have done. We unite under strength, not under law." Antony's hand clenched around the dagger. "Then let us swear it." They pricked their palms, 3 drops of blood falling onto Caesar's blade. "By this blood," Antony said, "we are bound, until his enemies are ash and his empire reborn." And so was born the second triumvirate, an alliance not of men, but of vengeance. 3. The purge of Rome. What followed was horror. At dawn, the names were read aloud, a list of Rome's condemned. Senators, orators, soldiers, men once praised as patriots, now branded traitors. Each name echoed through the forum like a funeral bell. Among them was Cicero, the voice of the Republic, who had spoken too freely of liberty. Antony's soldiers dragged him from his villa. When the blade fell, Antony took his head and had it nailed to the rostra. the same platform where Cicero had spoken against Caesar. The people watched in silence. The message was clear. Rome was no longer ruled by words. Gold and blood flowed together as property was seized. Enemies hunted, and fear became law. Yet, beneath the terror, the triumvirate thrived, filling Caesar's treasury, raising new legions, and preparing for war. The fourth, the hunt for the liberators. Across the Aegean, Brutus and Cassius gathered their armies, legions of veterans who still clung to the dream of the Republic. They called themselves the Liberators, but to the triumvirate, they were heretics, murderers of a god. Octavian's plan was cold and exacting. He would strike not just with swords, but with symbols. "We do not fight for Caesar's memory," he told Antony. "We fight for his divinity." Thus began the campaign of vengeance, the march to Philippi. The three leaders divided command. Antony took the vanguard, his soldiers loyal to his fire. Octavian commanded the reserves, young yet terrifyingly brilliant. Lepidus guarded Rome, holding the heart of power. As the legions sailed east, the wind carried Caesar's name across the seas like a battle cry. "Divus Julius," they shouted, "for the god who walks the stars." The battle of vows. Before the first clash at Philippi, Antony raised his sword beneath the blazing sun. "Caesar," he cried, "look upon your sons. We march not as men, but as your vengeance made flesh." The soldiers roared. Drums thundered like the heart of Mars himself. The liberators' banners faced them from across the plains. Brutus in his armor, Cassius by his side. Old friends turned enemies, patriots turned parricides. The earth trembled with the weight of destiny. The first day's battle ended in chaos, neither side claiming victory. But on the second day, the gods chose. Cassius, misled by false omens, fell upon his sword. Brutus, seeing his friend dead and his army scattered, whispered a final prayer to Rome and followed him into oblivion. When the dust settled, Antony and Octavian stood over the field of corpses. "The gods have spoken," Antony said quietly. "Caesar is avenged." Octavian looked to the horizon, where the blood-red sun sank into smoke. "No," he said. "Vengeance is only the beginning, Vi." The shadow of empire back in Rome. The comet still burned faintly in the heavens. The people knelt in the streets, whispering prayers to Divus Julius. Temples rose, statues gleamed, but beneath the marble, the triumvirate began to crack. Lepidus grew distant, cautious of Antony's temper and Octavian's ambition. Antony, drunk on victory, found new love in the east, the queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, who wore gold as easily as sin, and Octavian smiled, for he knew the war for vengeance was over. Now began the war for Rome itself. They had avenged a god. Now they would fight to become one. Chapter the 14th. The Queen of the Nile. She came to him not as a woman, but as a storm, veiled in silk, crowned in sunlight, and holding in her eyes the death of empires. The river of gods, the Nile glittered like a golden serpent beneath the Egyptian sun. Its waters whispered to the gods of ages past, Isis, Ra, Osiris, names that had ruled before Rome was born. It was there, upon a barge, adorned with sails of purple and gold, that Mark Antony first saw Cleopatra, the seventh Philopator, queen of Egypt. The air smelled of myrrh and lotus. Musicians played softly as doves circled above the river. Cleopatra reclined upon a throne of ivory, wearing a crown shaped like the rising sun. Her gown shimmered like molten bronze, and around her neck coiled a serpent of emerald, the symbol of royalty and of death. Antony stood on the shore, his heart caught between duty and desire. "Is this woman mortal?" he murmured. "Or has the Nile itself taken form to tempt me?" When she spoke, her voice was like honey poured over fire. "Rome has sent its lion," she said, "and Egypt greets him, not with chains, but with worship." Antony bowed. But in his heart, he already felt the snare tighten. To the serpent's charm, Cleopatra knew men, their hunger for glory, their need to be worshipped. But Antony was different. He did not seek to own her, he sought to understand her, and so began a union that would reshape the world. Night after night, they dined upon terraces overlooking the river. They spoke of gods, empires, and destiny. Cleopatra whispered of Egypt's ancient magic, of stars that guided kings, of prophecies written in flame. Antony told her of Caesar, the man who had changed his life, whose blood now burned in the sky. He was a god, Antony said, but Rome forgot him. Cleopatra smiled faintly. "Then let us remind Rome what gods can do." They drank wine infused with petals and gold. They sailed by moonlight upon the Nile, and the people of Alexandria bowed to them as to Osiris and Isis reborn. Rumors spread across the world. Antony has fallen to the witch of the Nile. But those who whispered did not see what he saw, not a witch, but a queen who ruled as fiercely as any Caesar. 3. The price of glory. While Antony lost himself in splendor, Octavian watched from Rome. He smiled, that same quiet, patient smile. "Let him drown in her perfume," he told his advisors. "While he dreams of love, I will dream of empire." Reports flooded the Senate. Antony was granting lands to Egypt, honoring Cleopatra's sons as kings, even naming one Caesarion, the child said to be the blood of Julius Caesar himself. The senators gasped. Octavian remained silent. He knew public outrage would do what his armies could not. Soon, the streets of Rome echoed with cries. "Antony has betrayed us." He kneels before the Queen of Egypt. Statues of Antony were defaced, coins were melted, and Octavian, the heir of Caesar, declared himself the true defender of Rome. 4. The Feast of Gold in Alexandria. The desert wind carried no such rumors, only music, laughter, and the scent of wine. Cleopatra and Antony held the Feast of Gold, a celebration of love and empire. Golden tables lined the halls, overflowing with pearls, honeyed figs, and roasted peacocks. They sat upon twin thrones, Antony armored in silver, Cleopatra radiant in gold. Together, she declared, "We are the sun and moon. Let the world burn in our light." Antony raised his cup to Rome, that she may kneel, not rule. Cheers thundered through the palace, but outside, beneath the starlit desert, the gods watched in silence. The 5th, the wrath of Rome in the Senate. Octavian stood before the people and unrolled a parchment. It bore Antony's seal, letters declaring Cleopatra Queen of Kings and her son Caesarion King of Kings. Gasps filled the chamber. "He gives away Rome's conquests," Octavian thundered. "He would make Alexandria our capital. Shall we let Egypt rule the heart of the Republic?" The Senate rose in fury. That very day, Rome declared war, not upon Antony, but upon Cleopatra. Octavian had turned the people's fear into a weapon. Love had become treason, and the fate of empires would now be decided not by lovers, but by legions. The 6th, the Queen's prophecy. As war clouds gathered, Cleopatra stood upon her palace balcony, watching the Nile flow endlessly toward the sea. The river never stops, she whispered, yet it always returns to itself. So shall I. Antony approached her. His armor gleamed, but his eyes were heavy with doubt. They call you a witch, he said. They call me your slave. Then let them, she answered. Better a slave to love than a master of nothing. She placed her hand upon his chest. If we are to fall, let us fall as gods. Antony kissed her hand. Then let the world bear witness to our ruin. The wind shifted. In the distance, Roman sails filled the horizon, black against the rising sun. The final war had begun. Between the sword and the serpent, destiny waited, and its name was Actium. Chapter the 15th. The Battle of Actium. Love can build empires, but only war decides who keeps them. The edge of the world, the dawn broke red over the Ionian Sea, from the decks of 1,000 Roman ships. The horizon burned like a wound in the sky. Sails snapped in the wind, white for Rome, crimson for the east. There on the waters off Actium, the gods had come to witness the death of an age. On one side stood Mark Antony, the Lion of Rome, with his legions hardened by 100 battles. Beside him Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, her fleet shimmering like a mirage, sails of purple unfurled like wings of destiny. Facing them was Octavian, the heir of Caesar, young yet terrible, his standard bearing the eagle and thunderbolt of Jupiter. Between them stretched the sea, silent, vast, and waiting for blood. The calm before the storm. Antony walked the deck of his flagship, the Invincible. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and prophecy. They say Octavian commands the favor of the gods, one captain murmured. Antony smiled faintly. Then let the gods test my steel. Cleopatra approached, clad in armor of gold, her crown gleaming like the sun. Rome's eyes are upon us, she said. They will call us tyrants, monsters. Then let them tremble, Antony replied. For today, Rome remembers who its masters are. Her gaze lingered on him, love and fear intertwined. If we fall, she whispered, Egypt dies with us. Then we fall as one, he swore. High above, the comet Caesar's star still faintly shimmered in the dawn. It was the same flame that had burned over Rome at his funeral, now watching the war born from his death. 3. The clash of empires, the horns of war sounded. From Octavian's fleet, ships surged forward, rows of oars cutting the sea like blades. Drums thundered, flames flickered from catapults, launching fireballs across the sky. Antony's legions roared in answer. Steel met flame. The sea boiled with chaos. Ships collided, splintered, burned. Men screamed in Latin and Greek, prayers lost in the wind. Smoke choked the heavens, black banners rising to cover the sun. Antony stood at the prow, his sword flashing like lightning. He cut down borders, shouting to his men, Rome is not one city. Rome is wherever her lions still draw breath. Cleopatra's ships advanced from the south, their golden hulls cutting through waves like blades. For a moment, victory seemed within reach, until the winds changed. The sea turned against them. Octavian's Admiral Agrippa struck from behind, cutting off Antony's rear lines. The east was trapped. 4. The flight of the queen from her flagship, Cleopatra, watched in horror as flames devoured her fleet. Her generals shouted for orders. Panic spread, one spark, and the storm was loosed. She turned to her captain. Break the line, make for open sea. The ship lurched forward, sails snapping in the wind. The retreat began. When Antony saw Cleopatra's banner vanish into the smoke, his heart broke. She flees, he whispered. The queen flees. His officers begged him to hold command, but love drowned reason. He abandoned the line, turning his ship from battle to chase the vision of her sails, purple against the dying sun. The soldiers cried out, leaderless, watching their general vanish into the horizon. Octavian seized the moment. The hammer fell. By dusk, Antony's fleet was ash, and the sea ran red. The fifth, the fall of the lion Cleopatra's ship, cut through the dark waters toward Egypt. Behind her, Antony's vessel caught up, smoke trailing from its hull. He boarded her deck in silence. Why? He demanded. Why did you flee? Cleopatra's eyes filled with tears. Because I saw defeat in the eyes of the gods. I would not have you die for me. Then I am already dead, he said. They stood together, watching the horizon burn. Antony took her hand. Rome has won, he said softly, but Rome will never understand what we were. In that moment, the heavens thundered. The comet above Actium blazed once more, a final flash before fading into darkness. Vi, the birth of empire, back in Rome. Octavian received word of victory. He stood before the Senate, calm and composed. The war is ended, he declared. The Republic is restored, but in his heart, he knew the truth. There was no Republic left to restore. The Senate, trembling, granted him absolute power. Titles were whispered: Princeps, Imperator, Augustus. The boy who had avenged Caesar was now the ruler of the world. And in the silence of his chamber that night, Octavian looked to the stars and whispered, "Rest now, Father. Your heir has fulfilled the will of the gods." Above Rome, where once Caesar's star had burned bright, the sky was now empty, but its memory still haunted the world. Thus ended the age of heroes. Thus began the age of empire. Chapter the 16th. The fall of the lion. Even the mightiest lion cannot fight the desert forever. The return to Egypt, the Mediterranean, was calm, cruelly calm. The once mighty fleet of Antony drifted in tatters, masts broken, hulls blackened by flame. Among the wreckage, the invincible Antony's flagship crawled toward Alexandria like a dying beast returning to its den. When he stepped ashore, the people bowed, not in triumph, but in pity. The man who had once commanded the thunder of Rome now walked as a ghost. Cleopatra awaited him in the great hall of her palace, draped in mourning silk. The air was heavy with the scent of myrrh and despair. "We live," she said softly. "For now," Antony replied. "But Rome marches. Octavian will not stop until Egypt kneels." He gazed out the marble windows at the city he had sworn to protect. White towers, blue harbors, golden lights, all seemed to shimmer like a mirage, as if the gods themselves were preparing to erase it from the earth. The price of love. In the nights that followed, Alexandria drowned in silence. The streets emptied, the harbors darkened. Rumors spread like fire that Antony's legions had deserted, that Cleopatra sought peace with Rome. The lion's pride began to crumble. "You think me defeated," Antony said to his generals, voice breaking. "But no man can call me coward while I still draw breath." He gathered his last loyal soldiers and trained them for a final stand. They fought not for conquest, but for dignity, the last roar of a cornered beast. Cleopatra watched from the palace balcony, tears glimmering like dew on marble. "The gods are cruel," she whispered. "They grant love to mortals only to make tragedy divine." The siege of Alexandria. Then came the storm. Octavian's legions arrived from the west, banners of the eagle rising over the dunes. The sea filled with Roman ships, the desert trembled beneath their march. Alexandria, jewel of the Nile, became a cage. Antony met them at the city gates, his armor gleaming with gold and dust. He raised his sword to the sky. Rome shall not take me like a slave. The final battle began beneath the blazing Egyptian sun. The sand turned red with blood. Antony's men fought like lions, but they were outnumbered 10-1. For every Roman who fell, 3 more appeared, relentless, mechanical, inevitable. The empire that Antony once ruled had come to devour him. By nightfall, his army was gone. The lion had roared his last. The 4th, the last deception back in her palace. Cleopatra received false tidings that Antony had fallen by his own hand. The words struck her like a blade. "It cannot be," she gasped. "He would not leave me." But the messenger's silence told the truth. In despair, she locked herself in her chamber and ordered her servants to bring her the asp, the sacred serpent of Egypt, the symbol of divine royalty and death. Before she could act, another messenger came. Antony still lived, wounded but breathing, calling for her. She ran through the halls, barefoot, golden crown slipping from her hair. When she found him, he was lying beneath the statue of Caesar, his blood staining the marble. "You live," she cried, kneeling beside him. "For now," he whispered. "They said you were gone, so I followed." Tears blurred her vision. She took his hand. "Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive. We were born beneath gods who love tragedy." He smiled faintly. "Let Rome have its victory. They will never understand what we were." Then his eyes dimmed, and the lion fell silent forever. The 5th, the queen's last embrace, Cleopatra ordered that Antony's body be entombed in royal garments, crowned with the laurel wreath of a victor. She would not let Rome see him broken. When Octavian's army entered the palace, he found her calm to calm. He offered mercy, promising her life if she would appear in Rome as his trophy. "To live in chains?" she asked. "No, young Caesar. You may have my throne, but not my spirit." That night, she dressed in her finest robes, the golden serpent embroidered across her chest. Beside her lay a small basket of figs. Within it, the asp, coiled like fate itself. She dismissed her servants and gazed upon the painted ceiling, constellations of Egypt's gods staring down upon their last queen. "Antony waits," she murmured. "Let me not keep him waiting." The serpent struck. Her breath slowed, her lips curved in a final smile. When the guards found her, she was radiant, as if in sleep. In death, she looked more alive than the empire that had conquered her. The 6th, the dawn of empire, Octavian, stood before their tomb, 2 lovers carved in marble, hands entwined for eternity. For a long moment, even he, the cold heir of Caesar, could not speak. "The world is mine," he whispered, "and yet it feels empty." He turned to his generals. "Let Rome mourn them. Let it be known that their deaths mark not an end, but a beginning." That night, he sailed back to Rome beneath a blood-red moon. The sea was silent. No wind, no voice, no gods. In the morning, a new name echoed across the world. Augustus. The Republic was dead. The empire had risen. And so the lion and the queen became legend. Their love devoured by history, yet eternal in memory. For empires may fall, but passion is immortal. Chapter the 17th. The rise of Augustus from the ashes of lions. An empire was born. The aftermath of the storm. When the sun rose over Alexandria, It shone upon a graveyard of empires. Antony was gone. Cleopatra was gone. Only the cold machinery of Rome remained. Legions marching through marble streets. The eagle standard glinting with ruthless pride. Octavian stood on the palace balcony, watching the waves break upon the shore. Beneath his feet lay the conquered world. Egypt, jewel of the East. Greece, cradle of reason. Gaul, subdued by fire. And Rome waiting, divided, hungry for a new god to follow. He was not yet emperor, but he already wore the silence of one. In his eyes burned the inheritance of Caesar, ambition without mercy, destiny without choice. The world mourns, said Agrippa, his loyal general. Let it. From mourning, power rises, Octavian replied. The age of Antony's passion had ended. The age of order had begun. 2. The return to Rome. Months later, the young conqueror returned to the eternal city. The streets thundered with applause. Flowers rained from balconies. Statues of Caesar shone once more in the sun. But Octavian's gaze was distant. He saw not celebration, but the shadow of what must come next. Rome was weary of chaos. It craved peace, pax Romana, though none yet dared to name it. The Senate bowed to him, their words sweet with hypocrisy. They proclaimed him princeps, the first among equals, though all knew he was their master. And so, with careful hands, Octavian forged a crown without calling it one. I restore the Republic, he said to the people, but his eyes said otherwise. He restored control. That night, he entered Caesar's forum alone. The marble statues glowed beneath torchlight, ancestors carved in stone, watching him from eternity. Father, he whispered to the sky, your revenge is complete. Now teach me how to rule the world you died for. A gust of wind swept through the temple, scattering petals and dust. It was not an answer, but it was enough. 3. The purging of shadow's power, like flame, consumes what resists it. Octavian understood this better than any man alive. He summoned the Senate, the generals, and the remnants of Rome's noble families. Names were spoken: Brutus, Cassius, Lepidus, and 100 others who once defied Caesar. Some were dead, others waiting for mercy. Mercy did not come. Rome remembers her traitors, he said, voice calm as winter. But Rome also remembers her heroes. Choose wisely which you wish to be. The purges began. By night, the Tiber ran dark with the blood of conspirators. By dawn, their estates bore the seal of the new ruler, Caesar's heir, Rome's destiny made flesh. No rebellion rose against him again, yet even victory carries its ghosts. In his dreams, Octavian saw the faces of Antony and Cleopatra, their eyes blazing with defiance across the Styx. You may conquer the world, their voices whispered, but you will never own its soul. He awoke each night in silence, clutching the laurel crown that never left his side. The 4th, the birth of the empire. The year was 27 BC, in a ceremony more solemn than coronation. The Senate bestowed upon him the name Augustus, the revered one. The name echoed like thunder across marble halls, through legions and provinces, through deserts and seas. For the first time in history, Rome had a single heart. He stood before the people, his voice steady and divine. Rome has suffered enough from ambition. Now let her rise, eternal, unbroken, ruled by law and peace. Trumpets roared. Priests raised laurel branches. The eagle of Jupiter soared above the Capitol. The Republic, in all but name, was gone. In its place stood the Roman Empire, shimmering, immortal, inevitable. And in that moment, the prophecy of Julius Caesar was fulfilled. One day, Caesar had once said, "A child of my blood will command both the sword and the stars." That day had come. The fifth, the vision of Augustus, years past. Under Augustus, the world entered a golden age. Roads stretched like veins across continents. Marble cities rose where once lay ruins. Poets sang of Rome's divine destiny. Yet the emperor's heart remained divided. At night, he walked alone through his palace gardens, past fountains, whispering of forgotten wars. He often paused before the statues of two lovers, Antony and Cleopatra, standing hand in hand, their gaze eternal. "They ruled through passion," he murmured. "I rule through peace." But peace has no poetry. In the stillness, he could almost hear Caesar's laughter, the laughter of a man who had lived as a storm and died as a god. He raised his eyes to the stars. "Perhaps that is Rome's curse," he whispered, "to create gods out of men and ghosts out of gods. Vi, the eternal flame as years turned into decades. Augustus aged like marble, pale, strong, unmoving. He had outlived all his enemies, all his friends, all his fears. On his final night, he gathered his advisors and said, "Have I played my part well in this great play of life?" They answered, "You have, Augustus, better than any before you." He smiled faintly. "Then applaud me, for the curtain falls." The emperor closed his eyes. Outside, Rome slept under a sky filled with stars, the same stars that had watched over Caesar, Antony, Cleopatra, and all who came before. And as dawn broke over the 7 hills, the first light of empire shimmered upon the marble of eternity. Men die, empires fall, but Rome endures. Chapter the 18th. The age of marble and blood. He found Rome in brick and left it clothed in marble. Yet marble cannot hide the cracks of the soul. The first, the empire of stone, under the blazing sun of a new century, Rome gleamed like a vision from the gods. Temples rose where once stood ruins. Aqueducts spanned valleys like veins of silver. And amphitheaters echoed with the laughter of citizens who believed peace had become eternal. Augustus walked among them not as a conqueror, but as an architect of destiny. He restored the Senate, tamed the provinces, filled the treasury, and named the age after himself, the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. The poets sang, "He who rules the earth commands the stars." And yet, even in triumph, shadows moved beneath the marble. 2. The cost of order power, when absolute, demands a price. Augustus knew that empires are not kept by glory alone, but by fear, silence, and the sacrifice of truth. The Senate praised him as father of the nation, but every senator knew his words were chosen carefully, for spies listened even in the marble columns. Friends of yesterday became ghosts of tomorrow. Those who whispered of restoring the republic vanished quietly, their names erased from scrolls, their homes given to the state. "Better to be loyal than remembered," said Maecenas, Augustus' closest advisor. "Better to be both," replied the emperor. He walked through the forum at dusk, the statues of old heroes casting long shadows across his path. In their stone eyes, he saw judgment. "You bled for freedom," he whispered to them, "and I gave Rome peace. Was that not worth the trade?" The wind through the pillars offered no answer. The third, the poison in the palace, while Rome's streets shone with prosperity, its palace walls dripped with secrets. The emperor's household, once his refuge, had become a battlefield of ambition. His daughter, Julia, beloved yet reckless, scandalized the empire with her affairs. His heir Marcellus died young, leaving a hollow place in his heart. His stepson Tiberius brooded in silence, a serpent coiled in patience. The gods mock me, Augustus confessed to Livia, his wife and queen. I built an empire for my bloodline, yet my bloodline threatens to undo it. Livia's smile was serene, her voice soft as silk. The empire does not need love, my lord. It needs survival. Rumors whispered that her hands guided poison more precisely than any sword, that those who stood between Tiberius and the throne did not live long enough to regret it. Augustus heard the whispers, but never spoke them aloud. He, too, had learned that peace was not born of virtue, but of necessity. For the shadow of Caesar, in his later years, Augustus began to dream of Julius again. The visions came like storms, Caesar crowned in fire, laughing from the heavens. You built what I began, said the spirit, but do you rule as a man or as a god pretending to be one? Augustus trembled before the apparition. I gave Rome peace, he said. Is that not divine enough? The ghost smiled sadly. You gave her silence. Peace without passion is the stillness of death. When he awoke, Augustus wandered his palace, touching the marble walls as if they might speak. He saw his reflection in every polished surface, a man aged beyond time, clothed in triumph, yet haunted by eternity. He whispered to himself, perhaps it is not enough to rule the world. One must still belong to it. The Festival of Shadows. Rome celebrated 40 years of Augustus' reign with games, feasts, and chariot races that lasted a month. The city roared with joy. Torches burned through the night, and golden statues of the emperor were carried through the streets. But while the crowds sang, the emperor watched from his balcony in silence. The cheers sounded hollow, distant, like echoes from another life. They love the symbol, he said to Agrippa's son, but they have forgotten the man. He turned his gaze to the heavens, where a new comet blazed across the sky, bright, fierce, unyielding. The priests declared it a sign of the gods' favor, but Augustus felt only dread. I have seen such a star before, he murmured, the same that marked my father's death. That night, he walked to the mausoleum of Caesar. Before the stone sarcophagus, he bowed his head. You ruled for ambition, he whispered. I ruled for endurance. Yet, in the end, we are both bound to marble, and marble cannot breathe. The cracks in eternity years passed, and Augustus grew frail. The Senate praised his immortality while counting the days until his end. Even Livia, loyal in word, had begun to prepare her son Tiberius for the throne. The emperor felt the weight of every statue, every triumph, every wall of stone he had raised. He had built eternity, but eternity was cold. In his final speech to the Senate, his voice trembled with truth unspoken for decades. Rome was born of passion and blood. I gave her marble and law, yet I wonder, did I make her eternal or merely numb? No one answered. They bowed as if before a god, and the silence of marble filled the hall. The 7th. The emperor alone that night. Augustus returned to his private chamber overlooking the Tiber. The river glistened beneath the moonlight, carrying whispers from every corner of his empire. He gazed upon his reflection, the face of a man who had become myth. Caesar conquered the world, he said softly. I conquered its heart. But who will conquer the emptiness that follows? He closed his eyes, and in the distance, thunder rumbled, not of war, but of memory. The ghosts of Rome's founders seemed to rise from the earth, watching as the first emperor of 1,000 years drifted into legend. When dawn came, the world did not change. The marble still shone, the legions still marched. Rome still lived, though its master had joined the gods. Empires do not fall in battle, he once said. They crumble in silence beneath the weight of their own perfection. Chapter 19. The Legacy of the Gods. When men rise too high, the heavens must decide whether to strike them down or make them divine. The final journey, the last days of Augustus, were wrapped in gold and silence. He had ruled longer than any before him, 40 years of order, peace, and fear. Now the emperor lay in his villa at Nola, beneath the soft breath of the Italian wind. His body was frail, but his mind still sharp as a sword unsheathed. The chamber smelled of myrrh and olive oil, and beside his bed knelt Livia, calm and watchful as ever. In the distance, the bells of Rome tolled measured, eternal. "Do not mourn me," he said quietly. "I have seen Rome reborn from fire. I have given her marble bones and iron blood. What more can a mortal do?" Livia bowed her head. "The gods will receive you as one of their own, or as their rival," he replied with a weary smile. That night, the emperor looked to the stars, the same stars that had guided Caesar, the same that had shone upon the Nile, the Rubicon, and every field of victory. A single star blazed brighter than the rest. "Caesar's light," he whispered. "He waits for me, to the death of the emperor." At dawn, the light spilled across the marble floors like molten gold. Augustus sat upright, his toga arranged with ritual precision. He summoned his servants, senators, and family to his side. "Have I played my part well?" he asked them. "Then applaud, for the play is over." Those were his last words. The first emperor of Rome, heir of Julius Caesar, closed his eyes as the sun crowned his brow, and the world felt the weight of history shift. Outside, Rome was silent. Then, slowly, the bells began to ring. From every hill and temple, from every market and forum, voices rose not in mourning, but in reverence. "Divus Augustus," they cried. "Augustus, the divine." In death, the man had become the god he had long pretended to be. 3. His body was carried through the streets of Rome on a golden bier, veiled in white silk and laurel leaves. Legions lined the Via Sacra, their armor shining like rivers of light. At the Forum, the bier was placed upon a pyre, higher than any temple. As the priests spoke the rites, an eagle sacred to Jupiter was released into the sky. The crowd watched as it soared upward, rising higher and higher until it vanished among the clouds. "Behold," cried the high priest, "the soul of Augustus ascending to the heavens." The people fell to their knees, weeping and chanting his name. The republic had died long ago, but now the gods themselves had sealed its tomb. Rome no longer worshipped democracy, it worshipped destiny. 4. The Temple of the Divine. Months later, the Senate decreed that a great temple be built in his honor. Marble from Greece, gold from Egypt, gems from Parthial, offered to clothe the memory of a mortal in the garments of immortality. The temple's roof gleamed like the sun. Within, a statue of Augustus stood, crowned with stars, one hand raised toward the heavens. At its base was carved an inscription: "He found Rome in brick, and left it in marble." Every morning, citizens would kneel before the statue, whispering prayers for peace, victory, or mercy. And when thunder rolled across the hills, they would say, "The divine Augustus speaks from the heavens. The gods of old Jupiter, Mars, Apollo, were no longer alone. The blood of men had joined their ranks. The bloodline of fire. In the years that followed, emperors came and went, some wise, some cruel, all bearing the name of Caesar. Each claimed descent from the god who had walked among mortals. The title, Imperator Caesar, Devi Filius, son of the divine Caesar, became the crown of Rome. Statues of Augustus stood in every province, from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania. To conquer under his name was to conquer under heaven's light. Yet the empire he forged began to tremble beneath its own weight. Power spread like gold, dust beautiful, yet blinding. Corruption grew, and ambition stirred again in the hearts of men. Rome had gods now, but still no peace of spirit. Even the divine cannot silence hunger, whispered an old senator, staring at the temple of Augustus. The empire feeds upon itself. But none dared speak the truth aloud, that in making emperors into gods, Rome had also made gods into prisoners. The voice of eternity. Centuries later, a traveler from the east stood before the ruins of Augustus' temple. The marble was cracked, the statues weathered by time, yet the face of the emperor still seemed alive, calm, unbroken, immortal. The traveler whispered to the wind, "Where is your empire now, Caesar's son?" And the wind answered through the broken columns, "Everywhere." For though the walls had fallen, though the legions had turned to dust, the idea of Rome endured in law, in language, in the beating heart of civilization itself. It was no longer just a city, it was a memory that refused to die. 7. The gods remember. In the heavens, where constellations shine like eternal witnesses, two lights glowed brighter than all others. One was the star of Julius Caesar, the father of empire. The other, that of Augustus, the architect of eternity. They shone side by side, above the world they had shaped, whispering to the ages below. "Mortals may die," said Caesar's light, "but destiny does not, nor faith," answered Augustus. "For the faith of Rome is the faith of all mankind to be remembered." And so, beneath the endless sky, the empire of stone became the empire of memory. Man cannot be a god, but gods are born from men who dared to dream as if they were. Chapter 20. Eternity. Empires fall, men fade, but the dream endures in the stone of time. The silence of Rome night fell upon the eternal city. The wind carried the whispers of centuries through the broken colonnades and arches of forgotten triumphs. No legions marched now, no trumpets sounded the call of conquest. Only the moonlight walked upon the ruins of marble and dust. Once, this city had commanded the world. Now, wildflowers grew through its cracks, yet there was beauty in the silence, a peace Rome had never known in life. In the shadow of the old Senate house, a child traced her fingers across the carved letters of a fallen statue. Divus Caesar. She did not know who he was, only that the name glowed faintly under the starlight. It was as if the stone still remembered, to the eternal dream far beyond time's reach, in the realm where gods and legends meet. Two figures stood upon the edge of the firmament, Julius Caesar, the conqueror of fate, and Augustus, the builder of eternity. Below them lay the world kingdoms, risen and fallen, languages born and lost, empires built upon the ashes of Rome. They watched in silence as men still invoked their names, centuries after the empire's fall. "They still speak of us," Augustus murmured. "Even now, because we dreamed beyond death," Caesar replied. "We built not a city, but a vision, and visions do not die." In that celestial moment, they saw every age that would follow: emperors, scholars, artists, kings, all borrowing from their flame. Rome had become an idea, immortal and untamed. Mortals feared we sought to become gods, Caesar said, his voice calm and proud. But what we sought was far greater: to give mankind the courage to defy limits. 3. The rebirth of Rome. Centuries passed. The Western Empire crumbled. The Eastern rose and fell. But in the heart of the world, the word Rome endured like a pulse that refused to still. Its laws shaped nations. Its architecture touched the heavens. Its spirit, discipline, order, ambition became the blood of civilization itself. From the domes of Constantinople to the cathedrals of Europe, from philosophers to generals, the Roman dream wore new faces. The empire no longer lived in soldiers and swords, but in thought, in faith, in the courage to build again. And in that persistence, Rome was reborn. Each time humanity reached beyond its limits, each time it built cities of light, roads across continents, or whispered prayers to the stars, Rome lived again. For the judgment of the gods among the gods, a debate arose. He defied destiny, said Mars. He rewrote it, answered Athena. He sought to rival Olympus, growled Jupiter. Or perhaps, whispered Apollo, he showed us what Olympus truly meant. For centuries, the gods had watched mortals reach toward the divine through art, war, and empire. But never had one man embodied their essence, as Julius Caesar did: ambition of Zeus, wisdom of Apollo, mercy and cruelty intertwined like fate itself. In the halls of eternity, they decided, let him stand among us not as one of the old gods, but as the god of human will. And thus, Caesar became the spirit of aspiration itself, the divine flame that burns in every soul that refuses to yield. The return of the emperor. Legends say that on certain nights, when the moon is full and Rome sleeps under its pale crown, a figure walks the forum once more, cloaked in silver light, crowned with laurel and shadow. He stands before the ruins of his statue, his eyes burning with the reflection of eternity. Survey what remains of his dream. You have not failed me, he whispers to the city. You endure because you remember. A sudden wind sweeps across the stones. The torches flicker. The air hums with the echo of unseen legions. And for a heartbeat, the eternal city breathes again. Then the vision fades. But those who witness it say the marble seems to glow for days afterward, as if touched by the hand of a god who once was mortal. The last oracle. Deep beneath the ruins of the old capital, in a forgotten chamber of prophecy, lies an inscription older than empire itself. No one knows who carved it, perhaps a priest, perhaps Caesar himself. It reads, "The empire of man shall fade, but the empire of his spirit shall endure. For eternity is not given, it is taken." Scholars argue over its meaning. Poets call it the final testament of Caesar. But the truth is simpler. It is the promise of Rome's, a promise that every man can rise beyond his limits and carve his name into the heart of time. 7. The light beyond time. 1,000 years later, a scholar stood upon the Palatine Hill at sunset. Before him stretched the ruins of the old palace, glowing in crimson light. He closed his eyes and felt, for just a moment, the weight of the empire still lingering in the air. "All this," he whispered, "for a dream." "Yes," answered the wind. "And the dream remains. For even when the stones crumble, when names fade into dust, the essence of greatness, the courage to build, to conquer, to dream survives. That is Rome's true legacy. that is Caesar's eternity. 8. The voice of memory. I came, I saw, I conquered. But beyond that, he also endured. In every soldier who defies defeat, in every ruler who dares to build anew, in every artist who seeks immortality through creation, there lies a fragment of Caesar's will. He is not merely a man remembered, he is a force eternal, a whisper that reminds humanity, you, too, can become the author of destiny. Epilogue. The eternal flame. As stars rose above the ancient city, two lights burned brightest among them, the same that had guided the founders of empire, Julius Caesar and Augustus, side by side, gazing down upon the world they had changed forever. Do you see, my son, said Caesar, even in ruin, Rome stands. Yes, answered Augustus, for eternity is not stone, it is memory. And memory, Caesar said, is divine. The heavens glowed, and the stars of Rome shimmered like a crown upon the night. The empire had fallen long ago, but its dream had become the sky itself. Ave, Caesar, Avenue Roma, you are not gone, you are eternal. Epic ending epilogue. The flame beyond time, empires crumble. But the dream endures. Centuries have passed since his body turned to dust, and yet his voice still echoes in the halls of men. Every city that dares to rise, every ruler that dares to dream, carries within them a spark of Caesar's fire. For he was not merely a conqueror of lands, he was a conqueror of the human spirit. He taught mankind that fate is not written in the heavens, but forged by those who dare to challenge them. Now, as stars shimmer above the ruins of Rome, one burns brighter than the rest, a crimson light upon the eternal sky, and the wind that sweeps across the ancient stones seems to whisper, Ave Caesar, you are not gone, you are eternal.